Preseason is over. It is time for the SEC play to start. Ole Miss versus Kentucky, 11 a.m. It's a stripe out. Go to College Corner to get whichever shirt you need for this ball game. It should be quite interesting. Me and Josh Guest, and perhaps other people that might come in as this goes, we're going to react to it one last time, the win over Georgia Southern.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, everybody. Hello, I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. We are going to be joined by Josh Guest. We're going to react one little bit of time to the Georgia Southern win. Hey, Josh. How are you doing? You're muted at the moment. I'm pretty excited about what could happen because there were 67,500 fans at the Georgia Southern game. And you said yourself before the show that the Grove was absolutely rocking. They're going to get 70,000 for Georgia, right?
Yes, Stephen, I believe so. In fact, I think Rick Mize that owns the radio station. He came by the tent and he asked Hayden and Jake and myself, he said, do you think we need to camp out before Oklahoma and Georgia to save our spot just for the radio tent? That's how packed the tents were. It was as many tents as I've seen since I started doing this. Now, I've only done this for 3 years, but from the standpoint of being at the radio tent, which I've been in the Grove obviously before, but from that view, it was as many tents as I'd seen in my 3 years of doing it so far. So it was great to see, and it was fun. There was people everywhere. There were tons of Georgia Southern fans. Couldn't believe how many Georgia Southern fans were already or were there in the Grove, which they got to enjoy something that Oklahoma does not.
Yeah, I genuinely feel bad for Oklahoma, not for their quarterback situation because it's kind of a joke at the moment, but them coming to Oxford, Mississippi and not getting to experience the Grove in all of its glory by having an 11 o'clock kickoff, they kind of got shortchanged, I think.
They did, and it's one of the iconic, venues, if you will, of pre-game or post-game activities for college football throughout the country, and one of the greatest places. Now, I will say, Stephen, we were spoiled the first few weeks because the temperature was very nice and pleasant, but it was just hot yesterday in Oxford. So it was just kind of hot and muggy. So it was it reminded me of last year. I think last year the entire season was that way. And so, anyway.
Yeah, and there's a tropical storm or whatever spinning up in the Gulf right now that's supposed to hit somewhere between Louisiana and Florida, which is affectionately known as the landmass, I do believe.
Yes, and last I checked, it was 55% on Saturday, 40-something on Friday. So I think they're still kind of waiting to see what that track's going to look like before we know. Of course, if we do get rains from that, it could just be a downpour the whole game and be a slosh fest with Kentucky, which I'm not sure what I think about that.
Yeah, I anytime it rains, the offense has the advantage over the defense. I think the defenses, Ole Miss's defense and Kentucky's defense, will cancel each other out, and the difference is going to be the offensive players. Now, Barry and Brown and Dane Key, they're really good players at wide receiver for Kentucky, but I definitely trust Jackson Dart more than Brock Vandegrift if it's raining.
Yeah, and I think I could just say I trust Jackson Dart more than, and just let anybody else fill in the blank.
Literally, I'm dead serious about this. If you told me that I could have any college quarterback in the country or Jackson Dart wins that 10 times out of 10. It's not even close.
Yes, and you have it at the bottom of the screen. Harris, 11, 225, 2 TDs. If you told me I could have any receiver in the country in college football, I would take Trey Harris.
One thing that's crazy with Trey Harris, he had that huge game against Georgia Southern. He has 650 yards receiving already through 4 games of the regular season. He is on pace this year, if this keeps up, which it probably won't, but it's still probably going to be absurdly high numbers. But he is on pace for like 115 receptions and 1,900 yards and like 12 touchdowns at this point.
Yeah, just ridiculous numbers. So it sort of reminds me, production-wise, of Megatron back in the day. He was widely considered unstoppable, and then went into the league and did great things for quite a while, and actually won me a lot of fantasy games along the way too.
On tomorrow morning's Locked On Ole Miss podcast, we drill down in the first segment on Lane Kiffin talking about how this team has a chance to be really elite. And then him talking about that, and not just talking about it, but talking about it the way he was talking about it. His tone of voice, just matter of factly, not him blowing smoke or anything like that. And that lets me know that Lane Kiffin really loves this team. He might have said he loved 2021 Ole Miss. He might have said he loved 2023 Ole Miss, but the toys that the Rebels have this season, it's pretty much second to none for Lane Kiffin. And he realizes that, hey, this offense has gotten over 600 yards in 4 straight games for the first time in SEC history. The margin of victory over 4 games, the 220-22 score, is the highest in SEC history. And Jackson Dart's the leading passer by like 200 yards in the country. This offense is freakishly good right now. And the defense against Georgia Southern, we can all wring our hands about penalties, and that's what we do. We're going to find nitpicks to go after. But the fact of the matter is, Georgia Southern had less than 200 yards, and the only way they got into the end zone was by tricking Ole Miss.
Yes, and Stephen, you mentioned, I saw that presser for Lane afterwards, and not only did he say that this team could be elite, and he talked about he had a great collection of players and could they become a team and how they had shown some things already, but even when he kind of hinted at some of the things they needed to do to become that elite team, in my mind, and maybe this is just Homer Josh talking, but in my mind, he said it in a way that he thought that it was going to happen. Like they were going to clean up the silly penalties. And he said, look, we're not going to be the least penalized team because we do play physical. We play fast. We play hard. We play violent. So there's going to be penalties, but what we have to do is get rid of the ones that we can avoid, the silly ones and that kind of thing. And I'm still bitter about the offensive pass interference on Trey Harris.
Oh, that was a terrible call.
That's the weakest call in the history of college football, and I'm overstating it obviously, but it was. He
didn't even extend his arm. He just had his hand on him.
Well, even the announcers were like, he extended his arm. I'm like, what do you mean? Where did his arm get it? Can I see that again? I mean, I just didn't see it, and I don't know what the rule is. JJ Pegues, the first face mask, it was his forearm that ripped the helmet off. I don't think his hand ever touched the face mask. Now, maybe I didn't see the right angle, but maybe that's still a penalty. I don't know, but it was not a grabbing of the face mask and ripping the helmet off, which is what it looked like.
Well, I will say this. On the Georgia Southern game, Chris Pupal, it was one of the most fun that I've had watching a player play linebacker for Ole Miss since way back when P. Willie was running around. I mean, it was that type of aggression, that type of violence. It was fantastic.
Well, and I was trying to come up with comparisons. I mean, he looked like, Sonic the Hedgehog when he was in his little super roll, speeding after people, or like fat, like when Mario hits the boost or whatever. It was just, it was crazy to watch him go after him. And it was a lot of fun too, because like you said, it's like pure joy, just like in his press conference when he talked about the defense, seeing Pegues get to play on offense and jumping over the line, and how special that was. And I mean, you could see how giddy he was in the press conference, just thinking back to that moment.
Yeah, it was really cool. All right, so when we come back, we are going to talk more with Josh Guest. We're also going to turn to your questions in the comments. If you had any questions, leave them in the comments. Don't forget to put your name and where you are, because we are curious to where you're coming from, and so we can get your perspective on the air as well. So do that. But first, I do want to let you know about, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. It's the place to bet which side of Ole Miss being minus 18.5 against the Kentucky Wildcats for Saturday's game, or the over-under right now, which is at 51.5. Ole Miss would have covered that 51.5, gone over the over-under. in 3 of the 4 games this season alone by themselves. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, the latest play-by-play, so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. So, Josh, let's go into the chat room and take some questions because they are going to, they're going to have some stuff. So let's see what they have to say. And we're going to start with Gary Grizzard. And they said, will we get Jared Ivey back Saturday? Maybe. One thing's for sure is nobody's going to know about it, but maybe. It is an ankle sprain. It is SEC play. Jared Ivey famously made that stack that put away the Kentucky game 2 years ago. So Jared Ivey might be back. I thought it was interesting in this game that the player that replaced Jared Ivey, I was really curious about that, was J.J. Pegues. You had a 325-pound man playing defensive end Saturday.
You did, and it just speaks to
and he did well. Man, he did. Yeah,
it speaks to his athleticism, his quickness, his agility to be able to do that. The thing that about JJ specifically was getting injured early, and then you could see him grab his arm or hold his arm several times later throughout the game. So I hope that he did not sustain something worse playing through. You got to believe it was something that was a pain tolerance thing, or they wouldn't have let him go back out there. You got to think that.
Yeah, they would not have put J.J. Pegues back in the game and let him dive over the pile if there were concerns about what J.J. Pegues was going to do against Georgia Southern. This wasn't Kentucky or South Carolina. Heaven forbid it wasn't Georgia. But they're not going to do that against Georgia Southern as well. This question, Pat0311 says, it's always good to see JJ come back in and take contact. That's absolutely the case. Tampa Zeke says, I have to say there was something different about Kiffin at his press conference in a good way. I am sensitive to small details. I've made a career out of it. Kiffin is committed to Ole Miss. Yes. And you can hear everybody talking about it. The only people that talk about Lane Kiffin going elsewhere are people that are attached to the other schools at this point because they have wishful thinking. Those schools obviously would want Lane Kiffin because why would you not want Lane Kiffin, But that doesn't mean that Lane Kiffin wants them, and Lane Kiffin isn't looking for the first thing smoking. He does sound like a person that he's here. He's planning completely about a championship run in football, and he's acting completely that way. Like he got mad about the Wake Forest rescheduling thing for 2025. That's not what a guy with one foot out the door would even care about. So, I think Lane Kiffin, he's at least committed to Ole Miss. I think we survived this year. Next year might be a little bit different, but I think they survived this year.
Yeah, I completely concur with Tampa Zeke's comment.
The penalties have gotten worse in the last 2 weeks, some bad calls, but the intentional face mask stuff is bad. It's not intentional. It's just grabby. That's all it is. They're just trying to grab whatever they can get. But it's not intentional. You don't get to play if you do intentional face masks because that drives coaches insane. Social media has lit up about Tennessee just jumping us. The dust will settle starting this week. Dart will get more recognition as well. Do not worry about the AP poll. All of those guys are smartest guys in the room type deal. So they're going to move up. I think Brett Murphy has had Ole Miss 5th, has had Ole Miss 10th, and has had Ole Miss 6th or 7th. He just moves stuff around. It's not worth getting over because Tennessee has to play Alabama and Georgia. Georgia has to play Alabama and Texas and Ole Miss. It's like if Ole Miss wins their games, they're going to end up second in the country and playing in the playoff with a bye. So don't worry about the rankings. Be excited about them because you're a top 10 team, but don't be worried about them. Brett Ford says, is there still not a locked on Mississippi State? I like listening to Blackerby while they're down. I would do the same for State. Believe it or not, somebody was like that close to signing the contract. It was a radio personality in Central Mississippi that was that close to being the locked on Mississippi State person. It fell through at the very end. I do not know what happened. But I hate that there's no locked on Mississippi State because everybody knows how I like to kick anthills, and that would be an easy anthill.
Yes. And with some fired up ants.
Yes. Yeah, that's just kind of what they do. Let's see. We have Brittany Whitaker. Brittany tuning in from Lake Charles, Louisiana. It was great to see Pegues back out there, but I'm definitely worried about all these penalties that we continue to see. Do you think they get better? I do think they get better, genuinely. I think they're a little bit handsy, but they're always, it's just like Lane Kiffin said, they're not going to be the least penalized team in the SEC. They play way too physical, way too violent, just in the way they play the game to not get penalties from time to time. The ones that they need to avoid is the drive-saving holdings. That's the thing that needs to go away. They need to quit being so handsy. And if you look at what happened against Georgia Southern, it was about 10 minutes of that. And then all of a sudden, Ole Miss self-corrected in the middle of the game, and you didn't really see those the rest of the way. So,
Steven, is there have you seen a stat on how many of those penalties were during the touchdown and the first field goal drive? Because in my mind, I feel like it was more than half.
On one of the field goal drives, 45 yards, 3 15-yard penalties happened that kept that drive alive. And on that touchdown drive that they drove down the field, I think there was at least 2 or 3 on third down that happened. Georgia Southern had 17 or 18 first downs in the game. 6 of them were off penalty.
Yeah.
So it does need to get cleaned up, but it can get cleaned up.
And I think, like you said, I think it's what Lane was talking about when he said we can be really elite. He was talking about cleaning up I don't know what the word is, silly penalties, the ones that you can avoid. But we're still going to have some, as he said.
Yeah, absolutely. Tampa Zeke with, hi, you noticed it too. Seriously, I haven't trusted Kiffin to stay, but his latest news conference made me believe that he's committed to staying in Oxford. Yeah, I think he's in Oxford at least for a year. Because he genuinely likes it here. And he's probably had the conversation with his family members and all of that. They're kind of putting down roots at the moment at Ole Miss. And with the fact that with the way he's going, it could be Kiffin Field at Vaught Hemingway Stadium if the way this keeps going with the statue and the whole 9 yards. I think Kiffin, whose obsession has been, let's do something that's never been done, I think he's enjoying what's going on at Ole Miss right now.
And he's the king of Oxford. I mean,
yes.
Let's face it. If we go to the playoffs this year, he's the king of Oxford and will always be.
Brett Ford says, hotty toddy from Collierville. Roland Morris said, Chris Paul is a beast. I'm so glad to have him. Dude is everywhere. It's been the first time since P. Willie that I saw a linebacker that kind of made me feel like that, going sideline to sideline. And the alligator roll. Everybody remember the P. Willie tackle that he used to do back 20 years ago? The alligator roll where he just roll. I saw Chris Paul do that as well, and I just kind of smiled. And pretty good. Pat 0311, Pooh wakes up on game day and chooses violence every single day. Yes, absolutely. Should be pretty good indeed. So we are going to take another break. When we come back, we will continue your comments. We're here with Josh Guest as well. He is the YouTube Mr. Guest 6034. He has his name down there, so you'll know whenever he comments on the show. But first, I do want to tell you about this. Not that button. I hit the wrong button. But here we go. All right, Game Time is your place to get Ole Miss tickets. You know, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. You know, Vaught Hemingway doesn't have a bad seat in the venue, but Game Time makes it to where you can see exactly what each seat would look like before you buy the tickets, so you know exactly what you're walking into. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, etc. They take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated football season in Ole Miss history, I may be able to help you out with tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, Josh, we will continue this talking pretty consistently, because game time, that last read, I genuinely think that Ole Miss might have 400,000 people in Oxford for Georgia. So if you have a house in Oxford, you might want to consider renting it if you're not going to be in it, because I imagine you can make all of the money in the world.
Yeah, I mean, any good season we've had in the last decade has been very nice renting houses out in Oxford, even all the way out. I assume that we could do so here in Taylor as well. Anything close to Oxford, anything that's if it's a structure that someone can rent, they'll do it, because that's always been, Stephen, going back to the days when I was at Ole Miss and you were at Ole Miss, and that the hotels would always fill up, and everybody was always looking for something or staying out of town somewhere else because there was just nowhere to stay. I'm genuinely concerned about getting the radio equipment to the Grove for Oklahoma, for Georgia, possibly beyond. If we somehow get to Georgia undefeated and beat them, I may just take the radio stuff to the Grove and just camp out there the rest of the season.
Yeah. And if there's a playoff game, if Ole Miss hosts a playoff game, there's no chance.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no hope for anybody. There will be 500,000 people in Oxford, Mississippi. It'll be like the Texas game in 2011 on steroids.
Yeah. I have to get a helicopter to get dropped off at the Grove.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. All right, so back to the comments board. Pat0311. When do we get some Loom merch available? I want a shirt with Steven's face plastered on it front and center. A ladies' man. I like that. We are working on merch. We are genuinely working on merch. Tegna is very sensitive about merch and very sensitive about basically me selling anything other than talking on the air. They're more than happy with me saying everything, but as far as selling anything, they're very weird about it. So we're working on that. There should be something probably in the next year or so. I think we're pretty close right now to having our own Roku and Amazon Fire app for Locked On Ole Miss that you can go into and see exactly what's going on. So it's growing. I think potentially there could be we do a newsletter now. I do a newsletter that I put out, but it's not done to where it's widely circulated. It's not like a true newsletter. It's for me to get used to that workload, for instance. So expect sometime in the next 4 or 5 months for an actual newsletter to drop as well. So my newsletter that I'm doing right now, like I said, it's just a workload and getting used to doing that on a daily basis so that when it happens, it won't completely screw up my world. So there's other stuff that is coming from Locked On Ole Miss over the next couple of months that everybody should pay attention to, honestly. James Mendoza says, go Rebs from Tupelo. Ryan had to win the first 4. We did it. Now the big boys come to Oxford. Well, Kentucky's coming to Oxford. Brittany Whitaker, fourth quarter show was amazing, by the way. What was it, Josh?
It was some fireworks, right? I believe there was some fireworks.
Oh, it's like the powder blue fireworks, right?
Yeah, they did a whole show, and it was during the second half, and that was, planned that way to be in the second half on purpose.
Yes, makes sense. It makes sense. Pat0311, please don't ever let Steve Robinson start at Locked On Mississippi State. I'm not trying to tune in only to want to jump off a building. I do not think Steve Robertson is ever going to be the Locked On Mississippi State person. I genuinely do not. Travis T. Hi, Steve. Hey, bud. Hudson Albers, everyone's talking about penalties. We've also played significantly lesser opponents. It's almost a disadvantage us playing us without throwing a few. When the SEC play comes, they'll let them play. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. They'll let them play a little bit, especially now that we don't get Alabama. Yeah, that'll help. Brittany Whitaker, what about Dart making history and breaking records? First quarterback in 20 years to throw for this many yards. Even Joe Burrow didn't do it. All the LSU people that might be tuning in, Joe Burrow did not do this. Jackson Dart is ahead of Joe Burrow's pace. So everybody can get really freaked out about that. You say Lane is here for at least a year, but Knox is enrolling in Oxford next year. Listen, that I get it, but that's not like a contract or anything. I'm not going to tie up. Knox is going to go, you figure, wherever Lane ends up. I don't think Knox is going to be left behind, but I get what you're saying, but I'm not going to make it. It's like he's going to stay here for 4 years because his 8th grade son is going to Oxford High School. Now, there's high schools other places as well. Roland Morris, the offensive line needs to get more push on defensive lines. Run game didn't do what I thought they would last night. They had like 4 linemen out last night. They're a little bit beat up on the offensive line, but they was fine. If they would have wanted to, Jackson Dart could have thrown for 700 yards that night.
I also think Georgia Southern made some adjustments from what had happened in the past and focused on it. I mean, they were trying to stop the run.
Yeah, they actually single-high'd Trey Harris, and that's one of the reasons Trey Harris went for 225 is because they were going single-high and they were running people into the box to not get beat by the run game specifically, and those one-on-ones, that's the reason all those long touchdowns were happening. Let's see. Kiffin will be the king of Mississippi if he wins a 90. He absolutely will. Yeah. James York, what has impressed me is the buy-in and dedication to the weekly improvement and take it one game at a time. This team is showing, it's a very mature team, a very, very mature team. Lando from Senatobia, Mississippi. If Kiffin doesn't go to Florida, he's not going to Florida. Do you see him leaving in the next 4 years? I do not know. That's too far. Anytime you have a college football coach, you cannot look 4 years into the future. That's the reason, as far as I will go, is at least a year. Because of the way it's set up. I do not think he's going to Florida.
I'm willing to go further, Stephen, but my vote doesn't count. So,
yeah. David Gibson hosting a playoff game will be tricky. We will probably need to go 11-1 with our schedule and either not lose or not make the conference championship. If Ole Miss goes 11-1, they're absolutely at least hosting a playoff game, but likely they might have a bye because 11-1 they're going to end up in Atlanta. Yeah, there is no going 11-1 and not going to Atlanta. So it's just the way it is. David Holley from Madison. Can State beat UMass? We got trouble at Starkville. Oh, my goodness, Josh. That Mississippi State-Florida game, Mississippi State is legitimately maybe the worst college football team in the SEC since maybe that Houston Nutt Ole Miss team from 2011.
Stephen, I kind of, when the game came on, I fully expected to see the Waste Management logo with Smokey the Bear because that was the dumpster fire bowl. It was absolutely a dumpster fire on both sides. Old Graham Mertz looked great, but I could have looked great against Mississippi State.
Right.
And I can't throw a football more than 20 yards.
KR Milam says, what record do you think Ole Miss is going, Steven? 1 second. I will tell you. Oh, wait. I don't have it in here. The Loom prediction is 11-1. I have Ole Miss is 11-1. And likely that one more chance than not would be Georgia. But we'll see exactly how it goes. Nielsen, Jerome Dillard, Hottie Toddy, Jackson Dart, go with a shark emoji. Fantastic. And we'll close it out here. Brent Wells, y'all think we purposely didn't run any tight end plays so Kentucky wouldn't have the tape? We could have given Prescott a career game Saturday. The middle was wide open all night. It was. But I don't know if it was purpose, but the first option in this passing game is Trey Harris. He is the alpha dog. And as long as Trey Harris is eating the way that he was eating, there's not going to be secondary receivers that have big days. We'll do one more question. Trace Buffkin says, Hottie Toddy from Senatobia. The Rebs look to get Daughtery and Ivy back and dominate Kentucky on both sides of the ball. Really excited to show our dominance for an SEC opponent. So that is pretty awesome. Anyway, Josh, what do you got going on this week, bud?
Man, just moving along with the semester. We do 8-week classes now, and so I'm all up in the middle of midterms and all that kind of stuff. All the school talk. Got a homecoming game for my Friday night football radio gig here for Lafayette in town, and so that'll be the big Friday night thing here But just as far as the week goes, man, just kind of another week going through stuff and making things happen.
All right. And you can become a Locked On Ole Miss insider by clicking the link that you see attached to me all the time and join the Locked On Ole Miss Insider program. It's about $5 a month, but it's a 14-day free trial. We basically send you notifications of all the relevant news that you need to care about, but you can check that out. It's usually the link is in the description of the videos that are posted. So check that out as well. I hope everybody tunes in tomorrow morning. We do our What We Learned episode, and then it is on to Kentucky. That should be really good. And then tomorrow night, John Forcade will be returning to the show again as our Monday evening quarterback segment is returning. He's back in the country. So take care, Josh. Take care, everybody. I hope you have fun, and we'll talk to you all tomorrow. Hotty toddy, everyone.
Hotty toddy.